Earlier this year, you may have noticed that I got somewhat annoyed. I was intending to upload the Retro Import review episode for Metroid Prime 2 Echoes for New Year's Eve, but I hit a bit of a roadblock in the form of Adobe's software completely failing on me. To give you a rundown of what happened, I installed the latest versions of Adobe Premiere Pro and After Effects, my then go-to video editing suites. I've been using them for a good few years now too, so I'm quite well acquainted with them. All the episodes of Retro Import Review you've seen were edited with them, bar one, and the same goes for most videos after around 2013. Now, that was probably my main mistake, installing the newest versions of a major editing program before the kinks have been worked out and it's proven itself. Usually that's a terrible idea, but here we are, I guess. Anyway, I set to work on the video to be uploaded for New Year's Eve, as the last video of the year. Work was progressing quite well and I was on course to finish on time and have it uploaded and ready, until it decided it wanted to chug. Usually when Adobe starts to get horribly slow, it's not a massive problem for me. A restart of Premiere Pro and After Effects usually fixes that for me, and I can get back to work after just a few moments. This wasn't the end of it though, as normally Premiere Pro doesn't regularly crash on me. I had spent an entire evening towards the end of December trying to fix whatever was wrong, but to no avail. Anytime I tried to free up any RAM and reload the program again, it kept crashing and spitting out a report, and with that, I got the impetus I needed for a very long time. It was time to ditch Adobe. Adobe's main bread and butter for most creative professionals is something called the Creative Cloud, a software as a service subscription where you get access to a whole swath of programs designed for you to make virtually anything you want. If you're a video editor, you may have used the aforementioned Premiere Pro and After Effects. If you're an image editor, Photoshop, graphic design, Illustrator, and InDesign. Web developer, most definitely not Dreamweaver, because that program is garbage and serves as Adobe's eunuch. Suffice it to say though, if there's a profession that deals with creating something, then Adobe caters for it in some way. It's a business model that has earned Adobe a reputation that's both impressive, yet unsavoury. It's impressive that they can provide and maintain all of the software for the relatively low price they charge, all things considered. But being locked into paying monthly or annually does hurt somewhat. And this is where the money comes into it. For me, a subscription for Adobe Creative Cloud costs a whisker under £50 per calendar month, or £600 a year. I spent this much for a fair few years, and whilst I don't necessarily have buyer's remorse, I do know that based on what has happened, I'd be putting good money after bad if I continued paying for their services. If you think about how many videos I make and release, it costs me roughly £50 to £75 to make a video, which is quite expensive for something that doesn't really pay off. As useful as the programs are, they are still a lot of money, and I have in recent times grown weary of software as a service in general, so I want to move on. There are, however, a couple drawbacks with leaving Adobe Creative Cloud, with the big one being that I still have to buy more software to replace it. There are free alternatives for some of them, sure, but a fair number of them are limited in utility, have a UI that's not very intuitive, or are difficult to come to grips with. Another thing with Adobe is its dynamic link system. Although it has its critics, it has worked almost always fine for me as a way to integrate After Effects compositions into Premiere Pro sequences. Since you don't quite get the same level of interoperability between other programs, it makes it tricky to switch away from. There's also Adobe Fonts. It integrates seamlessly with Adobe Creative Cloud products and gives you access to a huge library of typefaces. And losing access to that kinda hurts. But in spite of that, I have a few options lined up, and I'm even making use of them right now in this video. So strap in as I embark on the tale of what I used to transition away from Adobe. The following programs in the Adobe Creative Cloud are the ones I have used the most frequently in producing my videos over the years: Premiere Pro, After Effects, Audition, InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator. For each one, I have found a suitable alternative, and I'll go into the positives and drawbacks of each. The big one is the main editing suite, Premiere Pro. It has an interesting workflow that makes sense to me and allows me to compartmentalise a lot of the work into chapters, as well as applying simple effects without much of a worry. However, you can't apply an effect to multiple clips, even when they're the same type or even use the same source. And, well, you know what already happened. It kind of decided to refuse to work after about 50 minutes of video were edited for retro import review. Those are only a few of the pros and cons of the software. I would be here all day if I were to truly critique the whole program. But suffice it to say, a change was made, and it's a change I'm going to be carrying for a very long time indeed. I have transitioned from making use of Adobe's Premiere Pro to using DaVinci Resolve by Blackmagic Design. DaVinci Resolve's primary use case is as a colour correcting tool for footage, but it's much more than just that, as it is a feature-rich video editing suite that can be used to make some high-quality videos. You can also make use of systems inside it, such as Fusion, the node-based visual effects system, that you can use to make some interesting-looking things. And if you want to do some audio work, you can make use of Fairlight. And yes, it's the same Fairlight as the stuff from the 1980s. The big drawback with DaVinci Resolve is that if you aren't accustomed to video editing and you're using it as a starting point, its interface can be hugely overwhelming. It's a lot to take in, and I don't even use a couple of the menus. This includes the Fairlight menu for now, because I can't really make use of it due to my Focusrite interface being slightly horrendous with it. There is one massive positive with it though: the cost. If you want the studio version, which unlocks all the utility within, it costs £225. For what it consists of, that's not a bad price at all, and a lot of the stuff in that version, such as offloading rendering to another machine, GPU rendering, more effects and plugins, and more rendering options, is somewhat tempting to me, but I don't absolutely need it right now. Instead, I'm running the version of DaVinci Resolve that is a little bit stripped back, but it hasn't prevented me from doing everything that I have done so far. So how much do you think it costs? £50? £100? Nothing. Nada. Zilch. Zero. Sweet F.A. You see, the whole idea of this product is that you're paying not for the software. Really, it's a loss leader for Blackmagic Design, whose business is much more weighted towards hardware, cameras, interfaces, control banks, displays, and monitoring equipment for broadcasts and the like. DaVinci Resolve serves as more of a gateway drug into the Blackmagic ecosystem, but it's also a very good tool for learning video editing because of its low barrier for entry. Just be aware though that you're going to have a bit of a time trying to figure out where things are. Allow me to go into an interesting exercise I had with this program. Tori, a very good friend of mine and also a really good composer of music, wanted a visualizer for her music to post on social media, but all of the options available to her were either not very good or too expensive. Being tasked with such a project was a bit tricky at first, since I didn't have that good an understanding of the tools I was switching to, and I couldn't make use of Adobe for this as she's not an Adobe subscriber herself, so I had to do some research. I found a plugin that would enable me to work on this, and with plenty of back and forth and some refinement, we came up with a really cool design that can apply to whichever style of music she's publishing. It also means she can render music herself. I just had to walk her through a few of the steps on the process of changing what she needed to change, and boom, her music goes up on Twitter. Check her out, by the way. So now we move on to After Effects. This is a bit tricky because I was sort of hoping DaVinci Resolve would fulfill the niche of being both Premiere Pro and After Effects programs in one. But as it turns out, that's not quite the case. It does a lot of visual effects stuff and it works quite well, all things considered, but it's not at all the same. With After Effects I was able to make a lot of cool transitions and info screens, particularly the introductions of retro import review episodes as well as credits rolls. It helps that I also have a boilerplate for how the layout looks. It's pretty simple and straightforward and I can apply it to almost any video I wanted to make. I just have to swap a few elements out here and there. Now, however, trying to find a proper alternative to After Effects for my use case is tricky. A lot of alternatives focus more on the visual effects stuff rather than the illustrative stuff that I was doing with it. It could be argued that I was misusing After Effects since what I was doing was stuff that could be done in a number of other programs, but whatever. That having been said, I did end up finding a program that, like DaVinci Resolve, is free to download, but this one does have a subscription option where you can pay for beta access to some unusual features, and I'll make mention of those in a bit. This software is called Cavalry, developed by a company called Scene Group, who are based in the UK in London and, more locally to me, Sheffield. I like to pick up any companies that are relatively local to me, you know? Call it Yorkshire Pride, I guess. Anyway, Cavalry is a 2D suite that works very much like Adobe Flash, now Adobe Animate. You have access to a whole wealth of 2D animation systems, including stuff like rigging, powerful text stuff, and even generation using external data via CSV or JSON files. If you've watched the Metroid Prime 2 Echoes review, you've seen it in use already. The graph showing sales data was animated using this program, as well as the intro ident. The program itself is a very useful tool for me, as it allows me to make simple 2D animations in the style that I like, and it gives me a reasonable amount of tools to accomplish that for me. I had a few weird quirks to work around though. There have been times where trying to move certain things in the layer list under other things would cause Cavalry to crash, and I ended up posting a bug report, but I don't think I got a response. At least they have a Discord that I could go into if I wanted, but I'm already in too many of them, so... As mentioned earlier, this program has a subscription option if you want to access beta features like working with audio files or using a physics engine within the program. It seems quite cool, but it's beyond my needs, and although it's cool that it funds development, £16 a month billed annually to shy of $200 is still a lot. Next up is Adobe Audition, an audio editing suite that I use primarily for recording voiceover lines and pieces to camera in lieu of a microphone on the camera. Audition is one of those tools that I liked using a lot, simply because it was powerful enough to do what I wanted with it, but simple enough that I could do whatever I needed without feeling overloaded. The way in which I worked with it was quite straightforward. I would begin recording a batch of lines, usually an entire chapter's worth, then I would begin applying effects to reduce noise, add a gate to get rid of breathing sounds, and as videos went on, my voice got louder thanks to my use of the Dynamics tool in Audition. Genuinely, it's a program I grew to love using, even if I don't particularly love doing voiceover. I can do a lot of stuff in this and have enjoyed using it thanks to what I was able to do. So here comes the rough bit. Audio software is just not cheap. At all. Many programs like this are closer to things like Ableton Live or Cubase, which are used more for music production than voiceover recording, which isn't especially helpful. So knowing that DaVinci Resolve makes use of Fairlight, I figured I'd try using that. The problem with it, however, is that I have a Focusrite interface and it reacts horribly to it, and I simply gave up trying to make it work for me in that. I started looking around for alternatives, because as much as I'd love a new interface, I'm trying not to spend too much money right now, so I figured I would try the most popular option for audio editing software, Audacity. It is a free and open source program that is very popular for those two reasons. It allows you to quickly record and edit a piece of audio rather simply, and over the years it has grown quite a bit powerful. In fact, a YouTube content creator I watched, Tantacruel, is the product owner and head of design for the program. I must admit, however, that I find it a difficult program to work with. I suppose this is partly because audio is not my forte, but I also find it awkward for the way in which I do things. I have to do things one at a time in that program, I find, and I can't get to grips with the user interface at all, which is the biggest problem for me. No matter the program, a well-designed user interface makes things very accessible and simple to understand, which is why I liked using Audition so much, since I knew where everything was or where it would be if I needed to find it. Audacity, however, was giving me problems I couldn't reconcile with. The downside to this problem is that if I want an audio solution that fits my needs, I'd have to pay for it, and a lot of them are subscription based, which is an immediate turn off for me right now. I don't want to be having to pay for subscriptions any more than I need to. So I accepted that I'd be paying money for something and ended up looking at a program called Reaper. Reaper is a digital audio workstation developed by Cocos, which was founded by Justin Frankel, one of the guys behind Winamp. Before I delve into it, this program has an unrestricted 60-day trial that you can test to see if it works for you. And based on a few tests I've done with it, I'd say I'm very happy to have this in my repertoire because of the power it has. In order to use it, you must first create an audio track and arm it to record from whatever device you are recording from. Once you've got that, you can get on with the job of recording. The quirk with this program, however, is that I basically have to do everything in one go. This effectively means I start recording, speak, and stop once I have recorded a line, and move on to the next one. In Audition, I would have done all of the lines as separate files, but here, the recording is all done on the same track. There are a few benefits to doing this though. For one, all the effects I have can be applied to an entire track of lines, so I don't have to perform the same keyboard shortcut to apply them to each one. I can also batch render these after clipping them and setting appropriate markers. It's a very powerful piece of software, and it's absurdly customizable thanks to its Docker system, allowing you to place virtually everything wherever you want to put it. As for the price, well, that's the interesting part. For those who are working professionals, you're expected to pay $225 for this software. For what it is, I don't think it's too bad, especially how powerful it is. But I'm not at that point yet, so what option is there for me? As it happens, there's a discounted license, access to the program for a reduced cost, provided you are using it for private use or making less than $10,000 a year using it. Given that I have yet to make a single penny from any of the videos I have made, this is the route that I have gone. So that leaves the other three: InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator. InDesign is the program I use for my scripts, mostly out of vanity, but also because I'm not a massive fan of writing in a regular word processor. It feels too restrictive for me. Photoshop is the program I used for editing images and creating thumbnails for all of my videos up to this point, and I used it every now and then for silly meme stuff. Illustrator is a vector illustration program where I made scalable versions of simple icons and like flags, as seen in some videos, as well as my DL and RIR logos. The downside is that, well, in order to use any of those programs, I need to be an Adobe Creative Cloud user. And I don't want that, I want to break free from Adobe. So what options do I have? Well, there are a fair few for Photoshop and Illustrator, but not as many for InDesign. The pool of options is somewhat sparse for that for some reason. One option would have been to adopt the use of LaTeX, a markup-based typesetting system that enables for excellent control of the presentation of documents, but I don't fancy learning this at this time. It would be neat, but not needed right now. And this is where a company called Serif comes into it. Serif are a long-established software company who released relatively low-cost productivity software on Windows over the years, generally as an alternative to Adobe's or Microsoft's own programs. In recent years, they went through a minor rebrand with a series of programs under their Affinity banner. At this time, there are 3 programs in this line with potential for more in the future. And I went ahead and bought all of them: Affinity Publisher, Photo, and Designer. Before I start, I want to say these programs have compatibility with Adobe file formats. PSD files will open in Photo, and AI files will open in Designer. INDD files won't load in Publisher, however, but IDML files do. The compatibility isn't one-to-one, and some things will probably break, but you can get it working quickly enough because the interface in each program is pretty close to what it's the alternative to. The UIs are pretty close to how the default Adobe UIs are laid out, which is good for me as I rarely make changes unless I know they benefit me. I don't know how much utility Adobe's programs truly have, but for all intents and purposes, everything I was doing in those programs already I can do in these. I can lay out documents in a really neat way, I can create vector illustrations simply and easily, and any image editing I need to do is pretty straightforward. It also helps that these programs have both Windows and Mac OS options, and even cheaper iPad OS versions too. The only program that doesn't have an iPad OS version yet is Publisher, but that is in the works. I don't need those yet, but they seem pretty neat. So how much does it cost? Well, that's the cool thing. Consider that Adobe costs £50 a month for an entire suite of programs. How much does any one of these programs cost? Normally, £48 for a perpetual license. To put this into perspective, Adobe's Creative Cloud has a photography plan if all you want is Photoshop and Lightroom, a really useful pair of programs. This costs a tenner a month. 5 months of that and boom, you've basically paid for the license of Affinity Photo. So a total cost of these programs is about £144. This makes up less than 1/4 of the annual cost of Adobe Creative Cloud. That's a bargain if you ask me. But wait, there's more! I bought these programs during the spring sale. They were 50% off. I bought all 3 programs, I got them for a total of £72. Not even 1/8 of a year of Creative Cloud. If £144 was a bargain, this is a goddamn steal as far as I'm concerned. In all, I spent about £130 on every one of these alternative programs, 2 of which were free, and 4 of them I bought licenses for. Considering this is 2.5 months worth of Creative Cloud, it makes me realise I could have done this years ago and saved over £1,000 on software. Amazing, really. All things considered, I'm especially pleased with what I bought and begun to make use of. These are by no means the only programs that are alternatives to the Adobe programs I used. There are a plethora of alternatives for every one of the programs I got. I'll go over a couple of them and explain why I didn't go with them in the end, as well as a couple alternatives for those on Mac OS. I don't use it, but I know some people do. DaVinci Resolve has a Mac OS version and it's free, but I get if the interface looks confusing and impenetrable to you. That's completely fair. If you want a free option, HitFilm is a pretty competent option, and it even has pretty powerful visual effects too. You could also buy HitFilm Pro if you wanted for about £300, which gives you a perpetual license with 12 months of updates. Another alternative is Vegas, that old stalwart of editing. It's how I started editing videos way back when on a totally legit and proper license, if you get what I'm saying, yar. Anyway, a copy of Vegas Edit will set you back £150 if you decide to buy a perpetual license, or there are subscription options that give you a whole bunch of access to other things if you wanted. As for alternatives to After Effects, HitFilm seems to basically be the one. It's expandable with plenty of effects and plugins, and it's pretty easy to use. DaVinci Resolve makes use of Fusion, which does much the same thing, but if that's not your bag, then that's fair. If you're like me and want simple animations in your videos, that's where I'm not especially helpful, because I don't know many of them. I just make use of Cavalry because it's free and does precisely what I need it to. As for Audition, or Reaper, which I went for, it's pretty cheap all things considered, and very powerful, but if you want something else, Audacity is an option. It doesn't work for me personally, but for most I'm sure it's fine for simple audio editing. There's also programs like GarageBand if you're on macOS, SoundForge, Cubase, Logic Pro X if you're on macOS. There's no shortage of programs at your disposal if you want to record and edit voiceover. And if you're using DaVinci Resolve, there's Fairlight, which can be used for voiceover reasonably well from what I know, provided you have the appropriate hardware. Photoshop alternatives are a dime a dozen. GIMP is a free one, and I don't really like it at all. To call it idiosyncratic would be kind, I think. Sketch is an option if you're on macOS. There's a fair number of them out there. Similarly, there's a good number of Illustrator alternatives. As mentioned, Sketch on macOS can be used for this, helped in no small part by its primary use case being for UI or UX design. Corel Draw is a well-established alternative too, but it's not at all cheap. Essentials is £115 for a perpetual license, with an option to spend an eye-watering £650 for the most fully featured version. InDesign alternatives are interesting. There's a fair number of them about, but it highly depends on what you want. Quark Express is one such alternative, but it's pretty expensive at $249 a year or $649 for a perpetual license with 2 years of updates. Scribus is another option which is free and available for Linux if that's what you're into. There's also Microsoft Publisher as well, if you happen to pay for higher tiers of Microsoft Office's plans, but I don't remember it being particularly great when I used it way back when. I have not gone into an exhaustive list of all these programs' alternatives, nor have I gone into other programs in Adobe's catalogue that you might use. If you search for Adobe alternatives on Google, you'll get a few images that name drop lists of programs for you to check out. In the end though, it does show that for a good number of people, if you're willing to put in a little bit of time to learn a new piece of software, you could save a whole bunch of money on software that you may or may not even make enough use of to necessarily justify paying £50 a month. That, however, is not for me to decide for you. It could be that you find the £50 a month fee to be perfectly reasonable and suitable for your needs, especially if you make significant use of those programs, or if your place of work uses it and you need something that will enable you to work on something from home if need be. It could also be because of familiarity. I spent a long time on Adobe, so I didn't feel the urge to swap until that one fateful night towards the end of 2021. Being comfortable with a piece of software, despite the expense, can have its perks, such as being particularly productive within it. Ultimately, whether you're using Adobe but want to find ways to save money, or are giving some serious thought to dropping Creative Cloud for what you do, or even if you're just wondering what other things there are despite planning to remain with Adobe, there are plenty of alternatives out there. This list won't work for necessarily everyone. Indeed, I expect this to basically work for only me and a few others, but that's not the whole point of this video. The point of this video is to show that you can break away from Adobe if you really want to and are in a position to. Sure, you'll lose access to a fair number of things in it. I'm going to miss Adobe fonts for sure, and programs like After Effects are legendary for what you can do in them. But if it means I can save some money in a time where money is a particularly crucial resource, I'll do it. If you're interested in watching anything else I've done so far, my main bread and butter is Retro Import Review. I haven't uploaded one in about half a year since my Metroid Prime 2 review, owing to needing to sort this office out, but hopefully this should be sorted in July. There's also my website, daniellearmouth.com, where you can check out my import collection, and there's my Twitter to keep up to date with everything that I'm up to. For now, this has been Daniel Learmouth. Siddhi.